high baseboards all around, and even downstairs there was a tin ceiling on the dining room, and so now it's nice because it's modernized some of the stuff, but I miss the old kind of comforts.
Yeah, no kidding. The nicer woodwork that you do have, you got from somewhere else. And
Yeah,
you
this is
brought it?
modern woodwork, but I mean
Like
the
reproduction.
older was nice 6-inch baseboard and decorative crown, and that was really nice.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and the nice register grates instead of these cheapy weepies because they were so big. I couldn't find anyone that was unique to the home, and the contractor that did the restoration threw them away. Those beautiful grates, he just threw them away, or someone scrapped them out or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this house actually then would have been a great story for us to do too.
Yeah, my schedule wouldn't allow it, but I'm interested in hopefully maybe we can do it next year because I like to know some history about the house as well.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So let's see. Maybe I'll start kind of from a beginning, so I make sure to kind of touch on some of these things. So again, my name is Matt Latham, and nice to meet you. Thanks.
Yes, Lamont Davis.
Really appreciate your helping us with this, Lamont.
Of course, Matt.
So this form, we'll just knock these out first. So this one actually kind of talks about what the project is and just your agreeing to participate in it. You can glance over that if you want. And then, actually, I think that's this. Yeah, no, there we go.
Okay. These should be fine.
Okay, so there's a pen for you. And then,
And my name goes here.
yeah.
All right. Put your name first. Okay.
Yeah, great. So now that's just participating in this sort of like, project, whatever,
Sure.
social science kind of project. This is about the fact that we're doing the interview of you and might take a couple of pictures.
Sure.
And you're letting us use that audio and images.
Okay.
And then as far as this interview goes and whatever we talk about, there's an opportunity, and we come back and do this later if you want. If on the second page I'll show you. If there's anything that you decide you maybe don't want mentioned or included or something, you could write that in
Okay.
here, and we'd make sure to honor that.
Okay. So would this be me?
Actually, that would be you right
Okay.
there.
Printing name of subject.
Yeah, I guess print and then sign. It kind of makes it seem like it's about someone
Juvenile
else,
or
but-
something?
Yeah, I guess we're just covering the bases there. So today is 6/20 this week.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, and on the phone, are you able to silence it?
Yes, it's silence.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's see. Where do we start? Like I said, I think we'll probably take that more organic approach because then we'll find out where we need to go.
Yeah.
So this is the one thing that's pretty awkward for me is I'm told that get the audio right
Up in his face.
Basically get it like sort of up, like maybe like that.
Okay.
And you don't have to lean or anything.
Okay.
I'll just go
About
like
right
this,
there. Okay.
And then you and I are able to look at each other and it picks up your voice well at the same time.
Good.
So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself again, Lamont, and then just kind of mention any kind of occupation or role that you play, and then maybe start to tell us about that a little bit.
Okay, my name is Lamont Davis, and I'm a resident at 1933 North 34th Street here in Milwaukee. I'm by trade a program manager for an organization called Community First, and Community First is focused on residential rehab In other words, we help owner-occupied housing with needed repairs to bring their home up to a code standard, a code compliance standard. I've been living in the neighborhood since 2004. I'm a father of three, grandfather of one, and I'm really in love with this Washington Park neighborhood. I think the thing about Washington Park is such a great anchor to the rest of the neighborhood. And I have a lot of fond memories, and most of them center around the Washington Park it, in itself, the park.
Yeah, well, tell me more about your kind of life a little bit. Maybe
Sure.
start from the beginning if you could tell us about where you were born. Or
Sure.
raised.
I was born in Chicago, Illinois. My mother had six children. I'm the second oldest of the children, and she decided to come here to make a change in the early 80s. She relocated to Milwaukee in 82. So I've been here about 31 years, and had a lot of fond memories of Chicago, but Milwaukee is such a nice place to live, and it's been my home ever since then. I think coming to Milwaukee, it was a shock. Chicago is more concrete, a lot of brick and concrete, and to come to an area where, at least in my memory, there was a lot of green spaces, a lot of cleanness around the city, and that's some of the things that helped my family fall in love with Milwaukee. It's just clean and green and just good outdoor kind of living that Milwaukee's known for.
Yeah, and how long have you lived in Washington Park?
Most of my life here in Milwaukee, my mom moved to Washington Park from Chicago, and so I spent my teenage years and my early adult years in Washington Park. I moved away and I lived in other parts of the city, but when I became a homeowner, I bought in Washington Park, and this is my first owned property is in Washington Park.
Right, and why don't you tell us about a little more about specifically what that childhood was like in the neighborhood?
Okay.
What do you remember about the neighborhood as a kid?
Well, like I said, I come from Chicago, and there was a lot of concrete. We were known for having fun in Chicago neighborhoods, but there was more guys like in a sand lot or a vacant lot playing baseball, and to actually come to Milwaukee and have green grass where you can play baseball and do some of those sporting activities was really unique. And so I was probably about 12 or so when I got here. And so I spent a lot of years in the park, climbing trees and just exploring a little nature and wildlife, swimming at the pool there, sledding down their hill off of Valide and 45th Street. And one of the craziest things that I did when I first got here is just I used to go on these adventure walks, and I just used to walk the neighborhood, just exploring Milwaukee and getting to know Milwaukee. My mom didn't know I was doing all these adventure walks, but I was really fascinated as a kid, and it kind of just piqued my curiosity about the city, getting out and seeing the city.
Do you have any memories of what you discovered on those walks?
I remember walking down Lisbon in the 80s, and there's Kerr's Candy there. There was also a lot of businesses, restaurants, parking meters. It's just kind of unique in the fact that there hasn't been parking meters on Lisbon in a long time, but I guess I can remember a time where commerce was pretty brisk and there was actually parking meters there. I think I was most impressed with the fact that there was so much vitality in the neighborhood. There was a lot of business that has gone away, and that business being gone is kind of a rude awakening. Just I know Milwaukee is trying to bring back a lot of communities and spur some local commerce, and that's been a reoccurring theme is what can we do locally, and so some areas are making some strides, but it's just so ironic that it was so much more business and commerce going in the 70s and 80s, and kind of dried up with the crime wave of the 90s that we had. And I guess that's kind of stark too. A lot of gang activity, I would say, was around this area in the 80s. There were some infamous street gangs, and I think we did a good job in the 90s of cleaning those kind of gangs and crime. I think the year I graduated in 1989 was our all-time from high school was the all-time murder rate in the city of Milwaukee, something like about 160 homicides that year. And so even though we definitely have it bad now, I do see some signs that we're turning the curve on some of the violence that I'm most familiar with.
So you mentioned some trends of what you've seen changing in the neighborhood over time. Do you have any other specific memories of your own of some of
Well,
those, like some of that crime, seeing it, or
I
being
mean, I
affected?
remember living a couple blocks from here, about 22nd and North, around in the early 90s. And I remember being on this block because there was a murder that had happened. I was over some car rims or something like that. But that was just so ironic that I remember this block being very gang infested, very um, crime crews over here, and now to see a stable block with neighbors who are all long-term homeowners. I'm actually like the baby on the block. Most of the other neighbors have been here 20 plus years, and so it's nice to see a lot of these neighbors anchor in the neighborhood. And a lot of the work was done. Some of this was through Axe Housing and Habitat for Humanity, who I know have had a strong housing presence over in this neighborhood. And so it's nice to see that you can stabilize a neighborhood by helping people with their housing situation. And I think that's what's actually changed in Washington Park right now is that there's a lot of committed providers of rehab services, home ownership opportunities, opportunities to be involved in the community and involved in the neighborhood. And that's what's really making a difference in the Washington Park neighborhood.
Hmm. Are you? You mentioned the homeowners on this block in
Yes.
this little part of the neighborhood. Are there any vacant or derelict properties on this little patch that you
Yeah,
guys?
just next door, this was a long-term rental property. I remember the homeowner who had owned the home for about 20 years, and she left the home she sold it about 2004. She moved to Minneapolis, and so over the last few years, there's been one long-term homeowner, and I'm assuming that they may have been in foreclosure because the home's been vacant about 8 months. Um, there's a rental property. There's always been a rental property on the corner, and that's been vacant probably for about 2 years. But other than that, I would say that it's been pretty stable as far as occupancy.
And are you starting to see any effect yet of those properties being unoccupied?
Yeah. Weirdly enough, I think last week, maybe even Monday, there was an incident with the police. They had a crash on 35th and Brown Street, and four officers were injured in the crash. And they traced the suspects back to my property next door. They had came. One was hiding next door, and the other one was like sitting on my porch downstairs, and that was kind of weird. I think whenever you have a vacant property, it just seems like there's a lot of potential people for hanging around or just trying to steal things out of the property, and yeah, we always see evidence of that.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Maybe what I should ask you next is about the work that you do,
sure.
and tell me, kind of start from tell us a little bit about that organization, maybe.
Sure. I started off in my career working for the Social Development Commission, one of the largest nonprofits in the city of Milwaukee. And most of my early work was focused on uh, helping seniors with needed repairs. We did a security improvement program at the time. It wasn't something that I thought I would get into construction, but it was so empowering, I guess, kind of to help a senior stay in their home. And like I mentioned before, there was a lot of crime going around when I was coming up, and a lot of senseless things. So this was a way of kind of being good for the community instead of some of the bad things. And so that sparked a passion to do home rehab and those type of activities. And so during my time there at the Social Development Commission, I managed a couple different housing related programs. So I have a strong background in housing rehab, weatherization, and insulating homes. And so I've been, I guess I could say, around a few organizations doing this kind of work. One of the organizations I work with about 2008 went out of business, as a lot of the housing rehab providers often do, it seems, in the city. And so my program was brought over to the YMCA. And at the YMCA, there was a community development center, and we had a lot of great things going on there. We were doing community organizing, things like urban gardens, um, the housing rehab program, just a lot of community related things. And so around 2011, the YMCA decided that they didn't find that in their core competencies anymore, doing housing rehab. And for a while, they had did a lot of new construction in the Lindsay Heights neighborhood. So they decided to get out of there. And so at the time, my direct supervisor, me and him decided to start our own nonprofit. And we wrote the grants, we created the name, branded our organization, and we were successful mostly because of our track record of doing similar work. And so we've been housed on 40th and Lisbon in the UMCS building, working with the Washington Park Partners, doing housing rehab. And we do a substantial rehab program. On average, our program provides up to $33,000 in subsidies for owner-occupied homeowner. And the only catch is that they have to meet the criteria, of course, but they agree to stay in the home for 5 years. So we give them enough money to bring them into a code compliance standpoint, and then they agree to stay in the home for 5 years to continue to stabilize the neighborhood. It's a popular program. We do about 20 of those projects citywide a year. We would like to do more, but most of the funding comes from the federal government, and this funding has been decreased in recent years.
Right, and that 5-year requirement is to keep people from tapping into these funds and then just flipping, or
Yes.
essentially to sell it, right? To get
Absolutely right, Matt. From doing this work over the years, that's what we started to see was a trend, was that an investor owner applies for a program, get $30,000 worth of subsidy, and then within a year or two, sell the house on the open market. And so the city has unfortunately had to put those requirements, another requirements that you have to have owned the home for at least 5 years before you can tap into the programs. So sometimes new homeowners feel left out because they can't find many resources that they need when they're buying a home. But, kind of have to put a line somewhere.
Right, so that would be a requirement that would keep investors
Yes.
from using this as a 5-year plan.
Yes,
right?
that's right. Yeah, it's a 10-year commitment now. 5 years on the front end and 5 years on the back end.
And that really is more about home ownership, isn't
Yes,
it?
in stabilizing neighborhoods.
So now I'm interested in hearing what kind of educational or job experience background did you have before you got into this work?
Before I got into this work, I had very little related experience. I graduated high school from South Division High School in 1989, and really didn't have a plan on what I was going to do. I worked for a little while at the Postal Service in a couple temporary positions. I worked for the UPS for a little while, and was not prepared for the physical work or the physical nature of UPS, and I was let go. That was the turning point for me. And the good thing was that this was about 1993. Bill Clinton had came out with a Jobs 93 initiative, and in response to high joblessness among African Americans and youth, there was a amount of money that was given to the city of Milwaukee to do a jobs training program, and I was a job trainee. One of the criteria was that you had to be out of work for at least 6 months, And so I met the criteria. Like I mentioned before, I started doing security improvement for seniors. Felt really good about the work, and um, luckily I made a career out of that. I spent 12 years at SDC. After the initial job training period of 6 months, my supervisor wanted to keep me on, and he actually offered me a full-time position. And over 12 years there, I probably had about 6 different positions. So I found a niche and a career, so to speak, in this area. And that's something that a lot of people, um, young youth, I wish would get more involved in the technical trades and the construction trades, because it is family supporting and family sustaining.
Have you learned anything? Have you know? I guess I want to say, have you discovered anything interesting about the neighborhood beyond what you understood about it since you've been in this kind of work?
I think the thing that I've learned about the neighborhood is that there's often this perception that when houses are torn down, that there's some gentrification that's going on, that there is a nefarious plan to uproot people from their homes. But the truth of the matter is that being a service provider doing rehab, some homes are just on their last leg. For instance, my home was built in 1898, I believe, and so that makes it over 100 plus years. And if the home has been neglected, if certain things a home has to have modernized, certain care has to be taken, and what you see doing this work is that some of these homes are just beyond saving. And so that's my biggest change in perception, is that all homes being torn down is not a bad thing for the neighborhood. What's bad is if nothing goes in place of that home. And so that's why I'm encouraged with Washington Park Partners that there are things that they want to do, like set up pocket parks, even orchards, community gardens, have other neighbors adopt a lot next door. So when you're doing things like that, I think you're maintaining the fabric, but just getting away from the perception that every residential structure should be maintained and preserved as much as possible. Yeah, that's true, but some homes I think are just beyond being saved.
Right. So you've seen kind of an either or thinking, people feeling that like houses have to be kept up and intact, and anytime a lot is cleared, that there must be some big problem that's happening, like,
Yeah.
or about to happen.
Yes, and I think there's these are big homes. Myself, I live here with my disabled brother. It's 1,400 square feet of flat for me, and that's pretty sizable when you look at the Habitat home, which may be about 800 square feet for the whole structure. And so my point is that some people are in single families with double the space that I have in this flat, and trying to maintain that. That means a larger roof that needs to be repaired. And what's the cost to repair that roof? What's the cost to paint all of your exterior painted structures? What is the cost to do repairs? And I think with the tight economy, we see that a lot of people no longer can afford to keep these big houses up, and it takes a lot of money to keep your home in tip-top shape.
So you might have some thoughts, perhaps, on small living spaces or housing density.
I think so. I think what we're moving into is an area where you're going to see in our urban communities more apartment buildings, more units that are smaller and require less maintenance. I think that can be done, but there has to be a combination of green spaces involved. Maybe there is the gardens or rooftop gardens. Maybe there's some green space in the common area. But I just think that, and that's another part about it too, is that homeowners have to be prepared to undergo the maintenance when they're doing these, when they're buying homes. We often help individuals with repairs, and then we'll get a call maybe in 2 or 3 years, and they're saying, well, the paint has peeled off, so there must have been cheap paint that your contractor used. And so working with them to understand that part of home maintenance is repainting after several years. It's cleaning your gutters from pine needles or other leaves that could cause the gutters to fail and create foundation issues. And so it's a combination of one, maybe smaller residential structures, which could be homes like that Habitat bills, or two, it could be condos or apartment type units. But I think the ultimately, whoever buys homes, if you're becoming a homeowner or a property owner, you have to be prepared to undergo the maintenance to keep that home from falling into disrepair.
Yeah, how does one learn what a home ownership is like and what's involved with owning and maintaining a home? Does one learn it from one's parents if they owned a home, or?
Traditionally, that's the way. Is that it's something that's taught from generation to generation. I'm a first generation home buyer. I never learned that. That's something that I had to learn my first few years here with the help of my neighbors who gently told me when it was time to cut the grass or when my railings were looking a little bit shabby. And so I think without having that historical perspective, where you learn it is varied. I would suggest that if anyone's buying a new home, that they go through an established home buyers counseling course. There's a couple excellent agencies around: Select Milwaukee, Housing Resources, Axe Housing, and what they do is they prepare you to understand what's going to be involved when you buy this home, what type of contracting you may need to procure, um, what type of tools you may need in the home. And so I know they have some excellent courses like that. But without someone going through that, I think you're right, Matt. I think it comes down to historically what you've learned from your family and friends and your experiences.
Well, still, you found yourself to be a new homeowner, and even if one grew up in a home that was owned by their family,
Hmm.
probably that new homeowner has some surprises, perhaps unpleasant, about owning.
Oh yeah, well, it becomes their responsibility, even though you may have memories of a roof being repaired. As a new homeowner, now you have real memories of having to procure that, come up with the funds to get that roof repaired, and then also even just negotiating with the contractor. Those are different experiences than when you're not a homeowner. I think home ownership is very real, and a lot of people struggle to understand what they're getting into. But it's definitely something where you need to have some access to resources or resources, just because you never know when you're going to need a roof, or when a tree might fall into the home, when the furnace may go out, when the water heater may go out, and those are substantial costs. And having access, or at least some type of financial plan or savings is needed.
I'm gonna take a second
Yep.
to shift my hands here.
Sure. Sure.
Actually, could we switch sides?
Sure, yeah.
That would give me an opportunity to twist my spine. The other way. Great, thank
All
you.
right. Good.
Now in our new interview position.
Yes, that's right.
So let's see. Do you have any thoughts? Do you have any ideas of anything that you think you'd like to bring up? Since you can tell what we're interested in. We're interested in the homes, the people, the neighborhood,
Hmm.
the factors, the forces in the neighborhood.
Okay. I think Washington Park is on the cusp of either going really good or bad. And I just say that is because there's been a lot of good work that's been done uh, east of 35th Street. Like I mentioned before, there's been Axe Housing, who's been strong, and some other agencies who no longer around. And Habitat is committed to this neighborhood. Community First is committed to this neighborhood. And so what you're seeing is that there is a line in the sand, almost so to speak, um, where community organizations are saying this neighborhood can be saved, and we're going to save this neighborhood. And I think that's encouraging. Unfortunately, I do feel that there is a lot of property crime and violent crime that's happening in the neighborhood, and um, I crime has no address. There's no way you can say crime. You stay on this side of the street, and we're gonna stay on this side of the street. And so I think we blur a lot of times. So even though things are really good, we do still see random crime uh, that kind of comes in. And I don't know what the answer is. I think that it takes a mixture of things. There has to be more economic opportunities for people who live in the neighborhood without traveling outside of the neighborhood, so to speak. And what I mean by that is if you have to travel 5-10 miles to get to work and you don't even have a car, that's problematic for people to sustain those jobs. And so what you see a lot of times with job initiatives is that someone's being transported to a industrial park or somewhere further outside of the neighborhood, but that's not sustainable. Jobs have to be created in the neighborhood where people live, and that's what's going to be the last piece, I think, in this neighborhood is what kind of economic development, what kind of new employment opportunities can be created in the neighborhood. 30th Street Industrial Quarter is a little known gem in Milwaukee, and just up at 30th Street, there's tons and tons of factories and establishments that you almost don't know what they do. But some of those places house 40, 50 employers. And I think if we can attract more employers to the 30th Street Industrial Corridor, employers to Lisbon Avenue, to North Avenue, Valete Street, then you're going to start to see some real change, because now there's an economic vitality that's going in the neighborhood. And I think that's what we need. Just east of 35th Street is a little depressed, and if those areas can rebound like they used to be 30, 40 years ago, I think you're going to see a big change in the neighborhood.
I think when we talk about challenges facing the city and different neighborhoods and the residents of the city, we hear a lot of different issues come up, like business employment opportunities within the city. We hear issues come up then maybe from the supply, the employment side, saying there's a need for trained candidates. We hear issues about business wanting to cite where the resources available or connections are strong, or whatever these kind of qualities are. Do you have any thoughts on is there a missing link or a missing factor? Is there an issue that's not being discussed here, or do you have any thoughts on why? Even if it maybe got a little political, any thoughts on why these kind of solutions don't maybe seem to develop that much?
Well, I guess, there's the oldest debate: can you really motivate someone, or is motivation already ingrained? And I think that's always the hard solution whenever you're talking about a job initiative, is how much is that candidate committed to doing on their own, and how much hand-holding will you need to do. And I think that's kind of a tricky mix to get right. When I look at my development and where I started off, being unemployed and not really working, what helped was having a mentor, was having someone who can kind of help pull me along and help me visualize a different life. And sometimes you don't get that. That's not as easy to get when you're looking at a job training program. Most of it is just by the numbers. Here's your opportunity. Here's the training that you're receiving. Good luck. I hope this worked for you. And sometimes what you need is someone who's going to grab that person and help them. And so in turn, they pay it forward. They take someone else and then they help them turn their things around for them. So mentor programs, you can't say enough about those. You do need the job training programs and job development programs, but you also need some kind of support for individuals that usually goes beyond the job. Those are things like people learning how to actually work. And when I say that, I just mean that there is a expectation that you're going to be regular in attendance, that you're going to come properly dressed and appropriately ready for work, whether that be you got your tools in hand and you got your steel boots on. I used to do a job training program with young men, and they often wouldn't come to work with safety glasses or with their construction boots, and you have to send them home. And so now you've missed 2 days or 3 days just because you didn't come prepared for work, and then soon it becomes a discipline issue, and maybe they're terminated. And so I think people sometimes just understanding the soft skills of work, understanding that work is competitive and that you are being judged by what the next person does, and that this is your opportunity to kind of get in there and show what you can do, and maybe carve out an opportunity for yourself. And so those kind of things are more harder to really teach to a lot of participants. But you're right. I mean, MATC is an excellent institution for people who may not yet have university skills, or maybe they're struggling just to get some basic skills. So there are some opportunities out here, and I think people are aware of it. But it goes back to that thing I said. How do you motivate people, or is motivation built in?
Yeah, and when you speak about the young person starting out with a job that's going to require them to have some responsibility and start acting like a professional if they're going to be able to keep that job, I find myself thinking about the idea of a social structure that helps that person kind of understand that and get on that path, like the social structure that says, no, you got your stuff, because you can't screw this up. I find myself thinking there's a context that is about coming to understand what it is to be an adult, that kind of awakening.
Yes, it is.
And then ideas about what it is to be a professional that not everyone. I mean, I don't even know where we get that from, but you have to help sort of pick that up, right?
You do. You pick that up, and I think one big thing is that sometimes people just they don't get pushed as much as they should be from that social standpoint, whether it's their peers, whether it's relatives. A lot of youth come out of school, they just don't have that nudge, and I think that's a generational thing. For instance, I'll use my son. I was blessed to get my college degree, but I got it at almost 40 years old. But one of the reasons why I got it is because I remember vividly my son being 5 years old and graduating from kindergarten, and being very proud that he graduated from kindergarten. But his mom was college educated, had a degree, and he had his diploma, but he said, "Oh, Daddy, where's yours? You don't have one." And so that was a very hurting thing. I mean, very emotional thing for me to have my son say, "You don't have your degree." And that spurred me to go back and get my education, because up until that point, I had this mentality that I didn't need education, that I was a hard worker, that if you give me an opportunity, I'm going to do the job, and that you're going to be satisfied with my work ethic. And that was probably very common in the 60s and 70s as a way to get successful and things like that. But the world is getting so technical and so educational based that there's just no way you're going to just get by on brawn anymore, that there has to be some kind of technical training involved in almost any job that you do, unless you're just at the entry level. And so I think people getting away from that thinking that I can physically work myself into success without education or training. That's the fallacy, and that's where we're changing as workers in America.
Yeah, do you think we're having difficulty in America shifting from an ideology that we have able-bodied Americans who want to work, there should be work available for them, to one of understanding that today all people are going to have to develop themselves into a candidate that can meet the needs of the changing world?
Yeah, it just doesn't stop. I mentioned that my disabled brother lives here, and he's working through the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. He has a seizure disorder, but he's going through retraining. He's worked at Goodwill, and so just understanding that even with disabilities or even with setbacks, whether that be educational, you didn't graduate high school, or maybe you never were really good at school, I think the modern worker is going to have to embrace that it's going to be hard, and that there's going to be some training involved, and that work is competitive, and you're going to have to do something that helps you appear to be a better candidate than the next candidate, so to speak.
And if we go back a step or two in this conversation to the point where we were just putting out the idea of a person wanting to find a way, or find work, find a play, find something.
Yes.
Found myself thinking that there's this idea of kind of hopelessness or apathy, maybe, or the fact that the idea that here's an individual and here's the world, and there's no kind of connection between how they can get in there and be successful. Do you think that the certain factors need to be in place for a person to be able to have hope, or to be able to have a vision of themselves with a
Well, that's what you said.
Life, we talked about this.
It comes down to hope. I think there tends to be this feeling of hopelessness when you grow up in urban, depressed environments. I grew up in neighborhoods where criminal activity was encouraged, where it was celebrated almost. There was almost a expectation that this is your neighborhood and this is where you're going to be. And I think that just comes from a lack of hope of people thinking that I can escape this neighborhood, that I don't have to be the fourth generation, fifth generation that lives in this neighborhood. And I think what you see is that without that hope, people don't fight as hard. But I think when you have someone who's pushing you, or you have something internal that fuels you to get to have a change in your situation, it's just like night and day. And that doesn't, I guess there's a statement that you can be from the ghetto, but the ghetto doesn't have to be in you. It's kind of one that I want to make. And I'm just saying that from the standpoint that just because you live in a neighborhood where there is crime, that doesn't mean you have to participate. That doesn't mean that it becomes that you let crime take over. I think you have to fight, and I think you, unfortunately, with crime, the nature of it is that you push it out of your neighborhood. You really never get rid of it. So there is a balance act of living with crime that you play when you live in certain neighborhoods. It's just a balancing act. But at the same time, I think you always have to have hope. I think all of the visionaries who've ever done anything substantial to change any kind of situation, they always had hope. They always had a belief that there could be something different, and they stayed strong and they stayed diligent. And usually there was a turning point at some point where their vision became real.
I'm going to switch arms again.
Sure.
With this recorder. All right. Oh, this is going to be great. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see. I have to try to find the thought I had a moment ago. Do you think it could be the case, though, that say, especially a young person in the neighborhood, given what they've experienced, you mentioned, criminality being a common kind of way of life,
Sure.
At certain times around here, you think they can develop a sense of pointlessness, observing enough social injustices, economic kind of, disconnects and so on, that one can develop the view that it's pointless, and then would certain things have to, do you see the need for additional change still to address that? Like, one of the notions I have in my mind right now is that perhaps your Washington Park neighborhood, as you go from block to block, you get a different situation in each block, and you might find yourself on a certain block and imagining the world of those living on that block, and they may just kind of see it all as pointless, and maybe truth is maybe there are factors of social and economic injustice in place that I mean, how could how could that individual be convinced that it's not pointless?
Yeah, that's a little harder because some of that is generational. It comes from your upbringing. I think the hardest thing is for individuals who are economically depressed when they don't have opportunity, they're not working, they've kind of checked out of the job market. Those are the individuals that we're going to have the hardest time reaching. There's higher unemployment rates in the community, and for maybe half of the people, that doesn't stop them. They continue to look, they continue to put in applications, they continue to get additional training, they continue to have work experiences, all in the hope that this is going to change their circumstances. But then there's a small percentage of people who have checked out, who just have said, you know what, there is no hope. And those are the ones that we're going to have the hardest time reaching and turning around because without something that gives them hope or something tangible or a tangible success, I think that's where they get disillusioned and where it really gets hard to, come up with anything.
So you live in this place, this context where there are people who haven't been able to, by their family experiences or the personal experiences or what they see around them, haven't been able to uh, discover what they could do, what they might be able to accomplish.
Right.
What about this mentor? Did you bring up earlier the mentor idea?
Yes. I think the mentor idea gives people a connection to someone who have walked their path. And I think, regardless of what people think, we're very similar in America in our experiences, in our life, past histories. And we don't get a chance to know that until we really can share. And sometimes when we start to share, irregardless of race, we start to figure out that, hey, we have a lot of common experiences, that we have a lot of common upbringings, and that you're not the only one who feels the way that you feel. You're not the only one who lived in an area where there was crime or where there was poverty. And I think once people can get out of that kind of poor me mentality and start to see that, people who are successful fight through adversity. One of the things I always say is the secret to life is not really what happens to you, because the worst things happens to us all. The secret of life for me is, how do you bounce back? How do you respond to these situations that could derail your life? Tragedies that happen, loss of loved ones. And I think a lot of people are not as resilient as they need to be. And that's something that a mentor can help a person understand, that resiliency is a very needed skill if you want to be successful. And those are kind of things that I think mentors should work with people is for them to understand that, we're all common, we have some shared experiences, but hey, this comes down to you and how do you bounce back? How do you respond to this tragedy, because it happens to us all?
Well, and you brought up the idea that a mentor the ability to connect can span what otherwise might be racial identity or some sort of perceived disparity. Do you have any thoughts on this idea of identification of, on any level, an individual at certain points in certain statuses in the neighborhood, identification playing a role in how people see it all?
We had a big incident in recent history. I think everyone was aware of the Trayvon Martin situation, where, without getting into the details, but perception of this young man with this hoodie that he was wearing, kind of gave him this ominous appearance. And so that's one of the things that youth seem to embrace, is this this tough guy kind of image. I think, in the truth be told, they're all not that tough, and I think that's hard to get beyond a facade. Sometimes it's like, you have a guy who's dressed up and looks like he's the gangster, but then really he's not. Without getting to know that person, there's so many people who would stigmatize him and say that he is this bad gangster, and that's just based on the um, cursory view of him, that he has all of these outwardly appearances that he's a bad guy. And I think that's some of the things that the neighborhood happens to be able to see through. And so, even though an outsider might see this guy with this hoodie as unemployable and probably trouble, some of the people in the neighborhood can see that he's just Joe's son from up the street, and um, he's on his way to school every day. Even though he looks like he may be up to no good, the boy is a straight A student, but has this persona of being this gangster in the neighborhood.
He's an art student.
He's an
Or
art
he's a
student.
musician.
Yes, yes, he is. He's a dancer.
Yeah.
So
Well, what about is when it comes to? I mean, are there certain barriers like this that are kind of um, intangible barriers that are a factor in? We're on that kind of race issue at the moment here. Is there like, for example, is there the perception among some youth that they'd rather be identified as a gangster because then that can feel like it recognizes their African American and urban kind of culture.
Yeah.
They'd rather be seen as that than as the tie wearing
Yes.
Uncle Tom.
yes, I think there is a real part of living in urban areas which does say you have to have a level of toughness. That there takes a certain strength for a young guy who is a 15, 16-year-old guy who's a art student, let's say, but he has to get on these buses and um, transport himself to school in some of the worst environments. I remember growing up, like I said, I went to South Division High School at a time when literally black officers were not allowed to patrol on the South Side during the 80s. There was not even a black patrol officer, and so that we were having some racial identity issues going on that I was unaware of. I learned that later in life, but I was always fearful because of the interactions with some of the Latino gangs. There was a general perception that if you were African American and you were traveling by yourself, you could be jumped and physically beat up. And it never happened to me, but I coming from Chicago and not knowing, and coming from a place where gang troubles are really real, I was always worried that I could be jumped just because I was black. And I think that's what happens now. When I see white kids who are going through the neighborhood, I know they have to worry sometimes that maybe these black kids are just going to jump them or just do something to them in these neighborhoods. And so there is a perception that these neighborhoods are unsafe, and that there could be a racial incident that happens. And whether that's true or not, I can't point to specific incidents, but I just have to know that it has to be very fearful in Milwaukee that we have these racial lines that we don't talk about. But it's obvious that we're one of the most segregated cities in the country, but we don't talk about why people tend to congregate by race in our neighborhoods.
Yeah, and I can't imagine that you and I are necessarily going to get at anything with this today, but I do find myself wondering, if there are a lot of people that really see there being a lot of opportunity for improved relationships between people with different racial, cultural, economic, geographic, differences, that there can be a barrier of fear that's a reality for all of us. Like just like the little
Yeah.
white kid walking through the neighborhood that you
Yeah.
described. You know, who's to say that we have any kind of solutions for that? Anything to calm their fears? You know, the individual, the black person moving through the suburbs of
Yeah.
Milwaukee. It's not like most of the population of those suburbs means them any ill will, but they probably do have a realistic, you know, a reason to be afraid that they
Yeah.
may be ill treated.
Yeah.
So how could we, you know, what do we have to offer these? You know, here's this range of opportunity, and then yet we have real fears. I mean, are these, in other words, fears based on reality? Are there, you know, you know, features within these issues we're discussing that have to do with that, or does it just take does it take risk taking? You know, what is the human factor that could get us through those conundrums? if you
Sure.
will?
Matt, I think one of the best things that we can do is what you're doing here right now is we're sharing. We're honestly talking about our experiences. We're honestly sharing what we think is going on, and whether we're right or wrong. I think people need to get their opinions out, and then they can kind of compare and contrast. I think for me, if I don't get more than two viewpoints on a subject, I don't feel like I made any progress. And so I'm often looking at more than one side of the story, even when I know what side I feel passionate about. And I think that's what it's going to take, is that more people have to be willing to accept different viewpoints. And I'm not saying anything extreme about adopting these contracting viewpoints, but point and take, how do you know that you don't like the Ku Klux Klan if you never even read about what they do? I mean, not to say that you're going to go out and now you sympathize with the Klan, but my point is, if you're gonna judge someone, no matter how infamous or nefarious you believe they are, at least get some background information so that you can see where they're coming from. And then that way it's going to help you as well, because now you know what they may have against you, or whether it's real or not real. At least you understand that enemy, or whatever you want to call them, you understand them a little better. Kind of like the old saying, you keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And I think that just means that we need to be aware of each other. There has to be some kind of sharing dialogue. I think any kind of community forums where you're bringing people of different backgrounds together. I know there was a recent discussion about some things in the neighborhood, and I'm always encouraged when Washington Park residents come together, because you see different people. You see Latino, you see Asian populations, you see white, and I think that's what's going to make the difference. Is you just have to have varied viewpoints, and people have to be willing to share, even if they're a little bit embarrassed, or if they even may be a little ridiculed for their viewpoint. I think that's the only way people can understand where we are, is sharing.
And as we talk about these situations, I found myself thinking, you bring up this sort of community meeting where you have people from fairly different cultural backgrounds, you know, coming together in a discussion about something. You've got the idea you raised of the African American trying to be able to engage in discourse or even contemplation of the KKK member, you know, and I found myself thinking that you know, the commonality is the human condition.
Yeah.
And yet we find ourselves focused on the easier thing to notice is the differences, right?
Yes, that's right.
Maybe the commonality is the harder thing to notice. Why is that?
Yeah, and I think that's why I said it comes down to sharing. How can you create situations where people can share experiences? And we have a lot of good things that we do in the city of Milwaukee, like our festivals. That's a time when different ethnic festivals are held, but people can taste a little bit of the food and find out, hey, German food may be similar to addition African Americans
Do you
make.
think we need a multi-ethnic festival
Yes,
instead of separating
yeah,
them all?
that's maybe it.
Maybe
all
the
at
most
once. Yes,
segregated
the
city,
World
maybe the
Fair.
most segregated city in the country needs to integrate its
Summerfest
festivals.
World Fair.
Yeah.
Yes.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's
So.
an interesting idea.
Yeah.
I found myself thinking about when we talk about this human condition and so on. I think I actually just lost that track of thought,
Okay.
but
Alright.
maybe it'll come back
Sure.
to me. I guess I was thinking about the commonalities and differences and yeah. So
Yeah.
I lost that. We'll just look for
That's
our
all.
next. So. Why don't you tell me a little bit, touch on what are some of the, we've talked about your being a homeowner and we've talked about your work. Can you tell me any other kind of involvements or roles? Like, if I were to ask the question this way, could you list roles that you find yourself playing in your life? Like, for example, brother, you brought up,
Sure.
father, you brought up.
That's a little harder. I mean, I think we play so many different roles. If I had to start, I would say definitely father, grandfather now. My granddaughter is a year old. Mentor. I find myself talking to more youth nowadays and encouraging them. I think community resident is a role. Because there's a civic responsibility you pay as a resident that goes beyond just living in the residence. It's participating in neighborhood cleanups and neighborhood initiatives and things of that nature. I think I play a role as a neighbor in this neighborhood. And I say that because we are neighborly. We speak when we see each other, we ask about each other's lives. We inquire when there's something bad that happens, and I think that's what's missing in a lot of neighborhoods is you don't have enough people playing the neighbor role. They're residents, they live there, but they could not be able to tell you what the guy across the street name is because they've never introduced themselves, and this has maybe been several years. So I think when you look at yourself, you play many roles, and with me, I think the older I get, the trying to do things for family and for community kind of takes precedence over the individual roles that you may play.
I my mind, to be honest with you, just kind of started wandering as you're talking about that. It's just making me think of different things. But what I'm trying to do is see if I can make sure that we're going somewhere specific. In other words, help us find a specific thing to talk about. How long did you say that you lived here in Washington Park?
Probably 20 years, 10 years in his residence and 10 years in a few other residents in the area.
And can you share any memories that you have of the neighborhood that might involve smells or seeing something or hearing something?
I think the biggest thing I could remember this neighborhood is just being clean. I think that's that was probably one of my biggest memories is the cleanliness of the city. That may have been an indicator of the pride that was here in the cities during that time. And the reason why I say that is you mentioned smells, but I grew up in Chicago in a pretty bad West Side neighborhood, and what I always smelled there was garbage and dead rodents and even dead cats and animals. Just a lot of pollution, and that's what I didn't get when I got here. And that was my biggest memory of Milwaukee is that fresh grass and cleanness. And I don't know. I would say there's less pride in the neighborhood now. Less people keeping the city as clean. A lot of noise pollution, whether that be loud music or just loud, conversations that may permeate the neighborhood. I see those kind of things more often when you look at the overall neighborhood. But my neighborhood is pretty peaceful. That this is typical of my neighborhood is what we're hearing now, and that's refreshing. That's a soothing place for me. Um, I'm often at work this time, so I missed some of this stuff. But that's what hear now is, overall, I think we need to be better neighbors. And I think if we can find a way to become better neighbors with each other, um, that leads to more respect and more understanding. And so, point example is that a guy may be playing loud music coming down the street, but if he's in a neighborhood where that's not really acceptable, he probably won't play that loud music. He'll probably turn it down and be real different when he approaches that neighborhood. But when there's no neighborhood compass, when there's nothing that says this is not acceptable in this neighborhood, that's when I think we see a lot of different behaviors. And so, we need to build up the neighborhood just by starting with each other. And that's one person at a time. That's reaching out to your neighbor and the neighbor on that side, and trying to come to a common ground.
Hmm. Do you perceive that somewhere in these 20 or more years, things have changed in the neighborhood, and
Yeah.
do you think that there's any there was a social order of some sort that sort of came apart or has continued to dissolve, perhaps?
I think I think there's some good things about neighborhoods that have changed. Like I said, I think the crime was a lot worse, but I think some of the longevity of neighborhoods are changing, meaning that there's a more transient population in a lot of the inner city neighborhoods, and I think that takes away some of the social fabric. So even though I mentioned how bad it was and how much gangs and crime, but I think people knew each other, and I think people were longer term neighbors during that time than now, where I see there's a lot of transient population. People are moving from place to place, and I don't know if you can ever build community when you have so many people who move around.
You mentioned earlier that you think the neighborhood may be at a crux where it could go down or it could go up.
Yeah.
What do you think the strengths of the Washington Park neighborhood and its people is?
Yeah, I think a big strength of the neighborhood is that you do have community organizations. There's a wealth of different community organizations who are working in the neighborhood. You also have committed individuals who are embracing being an entrepreneur. Right up the street on 34th in Lisbon, there's a bakery, Amaranth Bakery, and that's encouraging. I know the owner, Dave Boucher, very well, and he's done a tremendous amount to kind of support this community. Right across the street from here, there's an art gallery, and those are things that you typically wouldn't think that you would see in the neighborhood. So those are good indicators to me that things are turning around, that people are hopeful. I'm sure both of those guys as business owners are hopeful that things are going to turn around. And we talked about that hope is what we need, a little bit more hope. And, that's kind of pie in the sky, but it's also the truth. If we don't dream, if we don't wish and plan, things just won't happen. And even with that, you still have to have someone who does it. And having those people who dreamed and hoped and actually did it in the neighborhood, that just lets me know that there's hope for other folks as well.
What about, we talked about this idea of the mentor or potential mentor,
Mm-hmm.
and then we've also talked about, or idea of, say, someone doing kind of well and they can make a good mentor, or someone who's maybe successful,
Yeah.
is there a disconnect that can occur for youth who could use a good role model, who could use mentorship? Is there a disconnect that sometimes occurs when someone is successful, where they all of a sudden see them now as an other? Well, you're now among the wealthy. You've got money. That's why you don't have problems.
Oh, yeah.
Well, is there something in there that happens that might make
Yeah.
it harder for these people to be able to help each other?
Yeah, and that's always a risk, is that people are gonna say, especially with youth, that you don't know my struggle. That's one of the hardest thing being a parent, and that I've always had to deal with is having my daughter or my son. That's how it was, Dad, when you were young. It's not like that anymore. And so any mentor or anyone who plays this authority figure is at risk of being discredited. But at the same time, I don't think you'd stop it. I don't think you can just say, nope, I'm not going to do it because I don't look credible. I think you have to do it. And I think that part of the role as a mentor is to reach out to new mentors and to constantly look to replenish that mentor base. So for me, that just means that if I help a young man now, I'm going to push him to help someone that he may have not helped or reached out to. And so I think you just keep paying it forward, and hopefully you get more people who are mentoring and doing support than you get people who are negative and not, kind of out of the equation.
I find myself thinking of a certain notion as we talk about this, because we've kind of gone left and right, and we've moved around, considering a lot of ideas about struggles that people have in a neighborhood like Washington Park, and the kind of barriers, the kind of disconnects, the kind of challenges that there are to connecting with a potential or solutions. And as you were talking about mentors just now, I found myself thinking of this notion of so many of the solutions that you've brought up strike me as having a common factor to them.
Okay.
Altruism.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, we can imagine an individual who is really feeling kind of hopeless or doesn't know how to seek a future that they might like. There's this kind of lost or troubled quality.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, we've got all these people or factors or resources that might be able to, or what do they need to be, or how could one help with this situation? And then so many of the things that you bring up seem to have altruism to them.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's just my predominant theme, something that I'm really into. But I just think that when people can adopt something and make it their own, that creates to an ownership. For example, if you did one cleanup, one neighborhood cleanup on your block, you're probably going to be more apt to pick up straight trash because now you've kind of adopted that neighborhood.
But now I'm confused, because isn't the American dream get for me what I can get for me? Really confused, because so much of the messages we get in our society seem to be about getting for me what I can get for me. It's not about anybody else getting at that. It's about me getting at that.
And I, unfortunately, I don't live that way, or fortunately, I guess I should say, I don't live that way. I just think I've never been so blessed where money was off the table, where earning money and being a wage earner was never off the table for me. Coming out of high school, I had to go to work right away, and so I think for me and a lot of people, even though the dream says go for self, the neighborhood is not that selfish as appearances will have you believe. And you'll find a lot of people in these neighborhoods who are very considerate and very giving, very willing to help out the next man, even at the detriment of them succeeding. And I think there's a segment of the neighborhood who's going to get what they're going to get, and they're going to leave. They're going to achieve their level of success, whatever that be, and they're going to get away from the neighborhood because they're going to say, "Hey, I finally made it out of that terrible place." But then you're going to have some people who are going to stay, and they're going to continue to give back. They're going to continue to try to visualize the neighborhood as a better place, and no matter how much money is involved, they're going to continue to kind of support the neighborhood. I mentioned the owner of the bakery. He owns the bakery and he lives within the block from the bakery. And so those are the kind of things where, like you said, he didn't just take his American dream and have a level of success and says, well, now I can move to Wauwatosa. He's staking his dream right here. He's basing his home and his finances here in the neighborhood. So, yeah, I think there's a level of you know, it's just hard in the neighborhood to explain it, but I think people in the neighborhood have made a commitment to stand here and to seeing this neighborhood turn around, even if it means maybe some less financial opportunity or less stately premises, or less stately of a home.
So you seem to be suggesting that there are issues, that there are quality of life issues that aren't just about money or certain status symbols.
Yeah, yeah, that's a part of the neighborhood that, and that could come from the memories that they had when they were youth. I think if you talk to some of these folks, they'll probably remember their family living in these neighborhoods, and whether we realize it or not, I think we're nostalgic. We like to remember things when they were better or safer or whatever those childhood memories may be. And I think that's what I see. I see a lot of nostalgia, people hoping for a return to a better day, and just not so committed. I know there's a lot of people who are saying, you'll never get that back, let's just keep on moving. But on the flip side, I see just as many people who say, hey, we can get that back, and if we can, at least we should try for it.
Did you have a certain hope or vision yourself of how this neighborhood could look or might look?
Yeah, I think when this neighborhood is really thriving, we're going to see some local job opportunities. We're going to see most of the vacant land being used for a purpose, whether that be a community garden, infill housing, supportive housing. We have a huge need for people with disabilities to live safe and live in their neighborhood outside of institutional care. I think we have a need for people to be able to age in their home. And that's one of the things that's real passionate about me, because that's where our history comes and that's where our stories. And I think when you have those visuals of people who have been in the neighborhood, who have those stories, then that's when you can see that, these are some good neighborhoods, and they're worth keeping.
And as far as the physicality of the neighborhood, you brought something up about pocket parks,
Yes.
The kind of features that could exist.
Yeah, I think the city cannot afford to uh, continue to let properties sit vacant and then bulldoze them. I think we need to be more reactive to vacant properties, whether it's getting someone back into that home and stabilizing that home, or taking it down and putting something that is sustainable there. And some of the things I talked about is sustainable household size. So if it's not sustainable for a mom who makes $35,000 a year to live in a 3,000 square foot home, it probably is more sustainable for her to be in an 800 square foot home. And I think once people own something, that's that's probably the easiest way to wealth creation, is to own property, is to actually own something. And I think if you're going to turn around some neighborhood, there has to be a mixture of home ownership, which is a wealth generator. There has to be some local business, and that local business is going to take on different things. I mean, it could be like we talked about the retail, but then there's other areas of home ownership or entrepreneurship, like I see group homes and uh, um, places where people age in place are starting to become more popular as businesses in the neighborhood. So I just think there has to be a mixture of things. There's not just one answer, and that's probably what holds back any real change, is that it's so complicated that it's going to take 5, 6, 10, 15 different factors all converging at once for most change to happen.
So no simple solutions.
No simple
No nice,
solution.
easy kind of.
No, those are all gone
No
away,
silver
Matt.
bullet.
Those are all gone away.
Is that a pastime?
Yeah,
You
this
used
is.
to think that things could be like that.
Yeah, things used to be so simple, but I think we live in a complex world and we have complex solutions. But I think we're smarter as a people now, and I think we've had enough social research done about what we do and what motivates us and what doesn't. And I think at some point, this modern society that we live in, we have to come together and create a modern solution. And it's it's going to take a little bit of the old, but also it's going to take some of the new. And that's one thing is we can't forget about the youth. We have to bring in a youth component to whatever we do, because the youth change what they want out of life, and the things that they want to do is always constantly emerging and changing. And I think sometimes me being older in society, we forget about the youth. And so I guess that's the last thing I would say is, no matter what we do, we better make sure we get the buy-in of the youth.
So in fact, maybe they're right when they say, "You don't understand, it's different for me."
Yes, that's right.
Maybe they're finally right.
Maybe they're right on at least one thing. Only if they're 18, though.
If I may, I'd just like to ask one last question. Is these values that you clearly have, that you believe in hard work,
Yeah.
it would appear. You believe in altruism. You believe in just mentorship. And a lot of these values you clearly have. Where did you get them?
I was raised partially by my grandmother. My grandmother was Mississippi born and raised, and those were kind of her values. She didn't have a lot, but she always had a meal for someone. She always had a couch or somewhere where you can sleep for the night if you needed it. She was just the salt of the earth, and just kind of overpowered her 3 daughters that she had, and she was our matriarch. And my grandmother Mary, and rest her soul, she just was. That's where we talked about that historical, that generational thing, and that's where I get a lot of that from her. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you, Matt.
Really appreciate not just the opportunity to talk to you and have you tell us about these things, but the discussion too.
Yeah, this is interesting. I'm glad you had some thoughts and some things that you're learning as you go through this, and that was encouraging to see that you know a few things about the neighborhoods as well. Yeah.
Well, I guess spending some time here, it has given us the opportunity to learn, not just pop in and then leave with the same assumptions we came in with.
Yeah. How many other residents did you get a chance to talk to?
Our team has interviewed 1, 2, 3, and you would be the 4th.
That's pretty good.
And we've also been working on a sort of a sideline idea that we'll put together a little kind of slideshow documentary about, that would be on kind of its own topic, which is the availability of food and the food culture. And
that's big.
It's kind of a complicated topic.
That's a real big, complicated topic. I mean, when you think about it, it's like I think understanding nutrition is kind of not talked about as much. There's been this disconnect. I mentioned my grandmother. My grandmother was her father was a farmer, and so she came with a garden plot, and she did her own little basic farming and stuff like that. Still, even in the urban environment, but there's been just. I was talking to a friend of mine, and she was mentioning Jamaica. Jamaica imports more food than they should. They should be totally self-sufficient. They have some of the most fertile farming land, but there is a generational issue going on where the women are being educated, and the men unemployment rates are approaching 80% of the population, and it mirrors what's going on in African American community. You have this historic generations who could have been farmers, who could produce food, but now it's beneath them. It's not something that's desirable to be a farmer, and so they're abandoning farming when that could be a savior for their country if they were to produce food. And we got some similar things here. You know, we have these institutional organizations who are doing all our farming, and so we're buying this mass-produced food that's chemically processed and all of this stuff. But then there's great groups like Mug and Victory Garden who are doing raised bed gardens, and you can get you some nice organic, clean food for pennies on your cost. And I think that's one of the things my organization, Community First, has been looking for. Is we've been looking for a funder who would fund each one of our rehabs. So we do about 20 homes a year where we're giving them $35,000 in each home, but we want to put a raised bed garden there. We want to provide a curriculum of home maintenance. How do you maintain your home? Where's the furnace filter? How do you paint the home? We want to show you how to get out there and actually brush stroke and paint. And so I think those are kind of things that, you know, just it's so many different angles, and it takes so much to get where we need to be.
Well, it sounds like what you're looking at doing is developing a somewhat simple, straightforward solution of a rehabbed home.
Yes.
And you're trying to develop
Mushroom
it into a
out
more
from there.
complex solution. A complex solution that involves gardening and home care, and maybe there are
We want to employ the
neighbor
young men.
ideas. Maybe
We
there's-
want to employ the young men in the homes who don't have a job. So we reached out to other organizations, and maybe we can hire them on and do job training activities. It's just, I think it's going to take a bunch of people, a bunch of different approaches to kind of get to the solution. It's going to take a lot.
On a personal note, real
Yeah.
quick, if I may, I mean,
Yeah.
I so appreciate so many of the things that you're mentioning.
Sure.
This complex solution idea, I'm,
Yeah.
you know, being educated,
Oh yeah.
probably trained to be an architect. But,
Okay. Yeah.
and that actually fits too. You know,
Yes, it
because
does.
That's kind of what architects do.
Yeah.
But I'm really liking the way you think about the solutions and the problems, and engaging in something is a more complex thing, a thing that can be like the solutions themselves probably are going to need to be fleshed out into something more sophisticated, or they won't probably do everything they need to be doing. Like
Yes,
you've
right.
got a home full of people, but you've also got, where's the food coming from? Is
Yeah.
everyone able to be employed? How are they getting along with their neighbors? Are they
Yeah.
taking care of the
Can
the
you
physical-
sustain yourself in this home?
Yeah, sustainability. Interesting.
We even go into financial literacy. We even talk about when we see a homeowner and they're paying 12% interest rate. Hey, you know, you're paying a lot. There's organizations that can help you refinance that down, and you can save yourself $200 to $300 a month. I think when you look at people, there is the desire for things to be sustainable, and that's somewhere here on the right side of the spectrum. But where you meet people is usually somewhere on the lower left side of this spectrum, where they're struggling and not getting by as well. And so when you put one or two measures in place, like you help them, one, you help them get a job. Two, you help them reduce the amount of interest that they're high interest that they're paying. You reduce the amount of food costs that they're having. You start to move them on this sliding scale from just struggling to maybe even thriving. And so one solution doesn't move them far, and then they can have a setback. So you have to kind of attack it on 3, 4, 5 different fronts, and then maybe you move them from struggling to sustainable. But it takes more than just one focus.
And it sounds like what you're describing is investment. If
Yeah.
one were an entrepreneur, if one were, say, an employer,
Yeah.
one would be aware of ideas of having to invest in one's, physical plans,
Yes.
one's employees,
Thank you.
one's delivery network, one's future employees. That one would have to continue investing in multiple layers for that business to be sustainable, as you described, right?
Yeah.
So here we're talking about people
Investment in the
live in
neighborhood.
a neighborhood. The neighborhood itself relies on the sustainability of each kind of home, right?
Yeah, that's our hope and that's our desire, that there will be enough investment on all fronts to kind of make a change.
I forget. I have to admit, I forget what toward the beginning of the interview you mentioned was something you might like to involvement. Oh, I think it was with your home. You might
Yeah.
appreciate being involved in this field school project, the BLC that we do.
Yeah.
Perhaps next year, where it might
Yeah.
include your home.
Yes.
I'm also just sharing out loud right now a thought that you might like to have your organization itself be something that we talk about and look at more
Yeah.
deeply, because those ideas your organization has sound like they may play an interesting role in the neighborhood,
It does.
not just the conversation we've had.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, if at some point Community First can enter into the dialogue and talk about how we vision our work and how the work of other service providers connects and how that is being woven into the fabric of the neighborhood, I think that's an interesting conversation that we can have at some point.
I know time has come up more
Yeah.
than once today. I suppose we have to figure out a place to stop.
Yes.
So maybe this should be
Maybe
it.
this is it. Right.
Let's see.
That was great, though.
Yeah, it really was. It's been a pleasure meeting you and talking to you, Lamont.
Thank you.
I guess I'm gonna go ahead and